Oh, yeah. I think, cursing, you can tolerate all kinds of things.
Is that why we curse after when we're in pain?
I think it could be. It could be brain curse. And it has to be an expletive. Yeah. You have to be cursing too. So, like counting is a good word. But singing might work, and I know that music is used for pain therapy. So people hearing music who have chronic pain conditions, it does help alleviate those conditions. And so with the songbirds, when we're trying to ask them, does it feel good to sing, we wanted to use condition, place, preference. And so the starlings, they can perceive colors really well. So we have a blue chamber and a yellow chamber, for example. And the problem is you can't take the bird and put it in the blue chamber and say sing. Right? They don't do that. So for 9 years, I was sort of trying to figure out how to do this. You could play them a song, and birds do seem to find hearing song rewarding. Young birds that are learning to, some of the song tutoring that goes on in the lab, the birds have to peck a key to hear song, to hear the tutor, and young birds will readily peck a key to hear an adult singing. And that suggests that hearing song is rewarding. But I'm not interested if hearing song is rewarding. I want to know producing song is rewarding. Part of that might be, hearing yourself sing. But I just want to know, does the act of communicating feel good in distinct contexts? And so we actually went to literature on ejaculation-induced reward in rats. So in that literature, they weren't putting the male in the side of a condition, place, preference apparatus with a female, because they didn't want the female to kind of, if there's a female there, maybe the female's what's rewarding, maybe it's not the ejaculation. So what they do is they have the rat ejaculate before it goes into the apparatus. And the idea is that the neural state that you're in before you go into the apparatus is going to be conditioned to that side of the apparatus. So we had birds, we would just let them sing in their aviaries. So we have, in this case, we started with zebra finches, which are these nice colonial house birds. They sing at really high rates, and we had quite a few in the lab. And so we just let them sing in cages. In this case, it was cages of males. And we didn't know if this would work. I felt like, well, let's pilot this out and see if it'll work. So we had the males singing with other males. And when they'd sing towards a male, they'd raise, their cheek feathers would raise, and they'd fluff up their neck feathers. And you could see that they're really directing the song towards an individual. They'd move closer as well. And other times they'd
trying
sing,
to threaten them as a rival?
I don't know. I think with zebra finches, this is an unusual kind of song. You don't really see it very frequently in wild zebra finches. In the lab, you will see it, and they're very gregarious, social species. I don't know if it's an affiliative thing, because they like to preen one another, or if they're fighting off a rival. In starlings, it would be a rival thing. But in the zebra finches, I don't know what the function is, but I do know that you could definitely tell they're directing at another individual. And in other cases, they'd sing off into space. You'd see no cheek patches raised. They'd just sing, into the air. So we recorded the number of songs. Each type of song, we called it a directed song. And that's the kind I think is socially reinforced, that doesn't feel good intrinsically. And then we had them singing into space, and I think that's intrinsically rewarding. And we just looked at the number of times, and we just grabbed them, and half of them we put in the yellow side of the apparatus, half of them would go in the blue side. And the idea again is when they're singing, they're putting themselves in a neural state, a certain state, and maybe they're feeling good. If they feel good, you'd say they're going to like the side that we put them in. So let's just say we put them in the blue side. When we looked, it turned out that birds that sang song towards another individual, they would spend time on either side. We had the whole cage open to them, and they could go on the blue side or the yellow side. They'd go on either side. But the birds that were singing off into space, they preferred that blue side. And we were thrilled. And if they sang a lot, they really spent a lot of time on that blue side of the apparatus. So we thought, well, this suggests, that this undirected song, like singing in the shower, is rewarding. And so this would be why animals would practice singing. And so then we wanted to test it in starlings. That's the main species we studied. And starlings are seasonal breeders, so they'll sing in spring to attract females. And they'll sing in fall in these huge flocks. They're doing it right now in winter as well. Sing in these huge flocks, and we've always wondered, why are they singing these flocks? Because they kind of seem to ignore each other. And we said, well, that's probably intrinsically rewarding. So we said, well, let's test it again in this other situation. And so we had the birds singing in fall. We put them on the blue side, and then say you like yellow or blue, they go for the blue side. And then we had the birds singing to attract females. And this time we recorded, were they successful? Did they attract a female or not? And it turned out they didn't have a preference. If they were singing to attract females, they'd spend equal amounts of time on either side. And we'd hoped that if they attracted a female, they'd really show a preference for that, for example, blue side. And And they didn't. But the ones that were not successful, that never got a female to come to the nest box, they showed an aversion. They did not like the blue side. They spent more time, for example, on the yellow side. So it's sort of, if you're courting a female and she's interested, okay, that's fine. But if she's not interested, that is aversive. And we did not have any males copulate. I suspect, if they'd attracted that female copulated, then they would have really shown this preference. Rats will show the preference, and I don't think anyone would argue about copulation being rewarding. So, but birds are starlings. To copulate, they need to have a nest box. They need a prolonged courtship period. We're not going to see it in a 30-minute test period. So we think that what we're testing is, does the act of singing, is it rewarding? And we think the answer is yes, but only if it's this undirected song that seems to be used for practice. Starlings learn song throughout their lives, and I think that it's important to practice. So, yeah, question.
Whenever we get into this question of correlation and causation, you sort of wonder if you got the arrow aimed in the right direction. How do you know that the critters aren't singing happily just because they find themselves in a happy place? I mean, is it the other way around, perhaps?
I think that's a really important question, and I don't know how to answer that. So the idea is, could it be that the bird already felt good, and that's why it's singing? And this is why it also prefers the blue side. It's not feeling good because it's singing. It already felt good, and that's why it's singing. I mean, when you're singing in the shower, a lot of times because something good happened. You're in a good mood. So that is something that's difficult to tease apart in this case. And I think that we have tried to do things like say, what's the best predictor statistically? We'll say, what's the best predictor of the amount of time they spent on that side? And so far, it's been the song. We say, is it you were feeding before you went in there, you were interacting with others, before you went into this side of the cage. And what predicts the amount of time you spend there? It is song. So that's a hint. But I don't know. And I would suspect it goes both ways. I would suspect that the birds that are experiencing positive affect, that are in a good mood, would sing more. And I also suspect, though, that the singing is going to induce this positive affect. And so I looked into human literature on this. And there is literature showing that individuals who are in choirs do report positive feeling after singing in the choir. I couldn't find literature showing that a good mood leads to singing, but I think we all know that often we sing if we're in a good mood. But that's the key question, and that's something that I'm not sure how to test that. Do you have ideas? I'd love ideas for that.
Have you tried, not just taking the blood out, but I don't know I know in people you don't put blood in unless you know that you got to match.
Is that looking brighter?
But can you, in starlings, I don't know how selective their blood types are, can you inject them with the proper opioids, starling-related opioids, and see if that leads to more singing or less? I don't think we get an easy conclusion because it might be, hey, I got enough opioids, I can stop singing now.
That's right. And we have done that, and there's one other group that did that. So with the starlings, we have not looked at that undirected practice song. We've only looked at the directed song where male's trying to attract a female. And what we found was that when we blocked opioids, and we just gave them
Naltrexone?
We gave naloxone, but naltrexone and naloxone block opioid receptors. They're used often to treat drug addiction. And so we blocked the opioids in the starlings, and they actually increased singing in response to a female. And so at the time we said, well, I hadn't developed my hypotheses or my theoretical framework at that point, to the point where I was thinking there were differences in undirected song and directed song. And we said, well, maybe if you block the opioids, they are more motivated to achieve that opioid reward they normally associate with singing or with attracting a female and copulating. And so there's this literature that suggests that you've got this opioid level that you kind of want to reach. And if you go below that, you're going to do things to get your opioids. And opioids are released through social interactions. So if they drop, you're going to want to interact socially. And the way a bird would attract social interaction would be by singing. So perhaps by singing, they're going to attract that female and get that opioid release. So when we blocked opioids, we saw an increase in singing. And it was subtle. I mean, they sing a lot to begin with. And I suspect that's why. There was another group, though, that studied this in zebra finches. And when they blocked opioids, the birds quit singing. And so I don't know why we have these differing results. Opioids are tricky. And so we're gonna test that again looking in starlings at the directed and the undirected song. We did see that when we gave them opioids, I mean, that's like giving them heroin, right? They quit singing, they didn't do anything. And so, yeah, I mean, that's sort of what you'd expect. But, we did get the reversal. You give the naloxone, they sang more, and you gave there was fentanyl, and they sang less. So,
It seems really tough because birds they just look tough to study all the way around. I mean, primates obviously look easy, easier because it's pretty easy to gauge their happiness and moods and all kinds of things.
Humans is easy. You can ask. I mean, but you don't
yeah.
know if that's how
Even
accurate it
primates
is.
Yeah, but the wrinkle with
facial.
humans is that they can lie.
Yeah, humans can lie.
Or
and-
tell you what they think you want.
Exactly. So, I mean, and there's a lot of survey data. It's hard to maybe censor.
Everything you're saying makes sense, but is there any danger that you're sort of projecting onto birds, maybe patterns of behavior or expectations of behavior that we sort of intrinsically see in ourselves? In other words, do they sing because it feels good?
Right.
Could it be that they sing because they're just evolutionary hardwired to sing, period?
Well, I
Or-
think that we're evolutionarily hardwired so that things that are necessary for survival are rewarding.
Yeah.
And
sure.
so I think that's what we're tapping into. And you historically you could not say that an animal had emotions or affective states, and now that's changed. There are a lot of research that has shown that animals do experience affective states. And yeah, what you see is if you look in the songbird brain and you look in the brains of rats are well studied and primates, is that you do have very similar reward systems. Opioids and dopamine seem to be very important for reward or reward seeking or the actual experience of reward. And those have been very well conserved through evolution. So some of the same brain structures that I'm looking at in birds also exist in rodents and also exist in primates. And some of the same neurochemicals are there. And you can ask rats, is this rewarding to you? Humans experience reward when they are given opioids, for example, and rats will bar press for opioids. And so I don't know that anyone's studied that yet in birds. Will you peck a key to get opioid release? But I suspect they would, because these are evolutionarily conserved circuits. And indeed, there's a study by a guy named Panksepp. He looked at crayfish, and crayfish will even experience reward associated with drug treatment that humans find rewarding. So that I think is an evolutionarily conserved system. But yeah, you don't want to get anthropomorphic. And I'm speaking about it sort of anthropomorphically now because I think it's easy to understand if you're talking about humans experiencing this, and it gives you a framework to think
It's a
about.
useful metaphor.
But the chemistry of reward goes back to when we
Invertebrates.
invertebrates. So
Yeah.
before the encephalopods, and
Yeah.
so we're back to the shale. We're back
That's right. I mean, it makes sense. Feeding must be rewarding, or
something has to click.
you're not going to feed. And sexual behavior must be rewarding. And I think the same thing. People always wonder, why are animals playing? Why are they practicing behaviors? And I think it must be reward systems are involved. And so that's what we're interested in. Are these evolutionarily conserved systems guiding communication so that you communicate when you need to communicate and communicate the proper kind of message, proper context?
So you're saying, in a way, it didn't strike me until you just said it, that it's the emotions are there to guide our behavior, and at least with people now, as a clinician, I'm finding that the problem is that people let their emotions guide them,
Yeah.
and doing that, they trying to regulate their emotions, they do all sorts of incredibly stupid things, like smoke cigarettes to help them to feel calmer, or dope and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Well, it's true that the drugs of addiction are tapping into these systems.
Yeah.
There's just basic natural reward systems are being hijacked by drugs of abuse.
Or just stay home and watch a lot of TV. Sure, I'll never get to mate. Sure, I'll have an empty, bland
feels
life,
good.
but I'll avoid anxiety.
It's worked for me.
See?
I was watching Little Miss Sunshine when I had to come down here. I missed the
Very
end.
relaxed.
Oh,
No anxiety.
yeah.
Granted, it's worth